Hello and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast for today, August 25th, 2020. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about. This is episode 48, and the Democrats are preparing us for President Pelosi. How is that possible? Well, I'll give you my thoughts on that in a minute, but first I want to remind you that you can follow my work over at my blog at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. Live streams, they happen every Monday night at 8 p.m. on YouTube and DLive.tv. Just search for me on both platforms and you'll find me. Now, warning, I'm a bad boy, I have a potty mouth, and I use those words in sentences. Now, you can also support the podcast by downloading and installing the Brave browser. Brave protects your online privacy by blocking all those pesky data snoopers, ads, tracking cookies, which feed the growing surveillance state. Moreover, you can earn crypto tokens called BAT for opting into Brave's ad network and use them to tip your favorite content creators who, like me, are verified publishers on the network. You use my referral code in the show notes to sign up. Be it your favorite website, YouTube, Twitch, or SoundCloud channel, you click the Brave logo icon to the right of the search bar to tip your earnings and directly support the content you love through those earnings. They're kind of like YouTube super chats, but without Google taking a 30% cut of your money. Lastly, you can join the more than 450 people who support me directly on Patreon at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns, where you can sign up for the twice weekly market reports covering current events and the technical state of important markets like gold, Bitcoin, oil, the Dow, and so on. And/or you can sign up for the Gold, Goats, and Guns monthly investment newsletter, which ties up all the cultural, geopolitical, and economic shifts and trends into a coherent portfolio strategy designed to help you make sense of a world going mad. All right, intro over. Let's get started. The Democrats, after last week's convention, have proven to the world and have shown to the world that they have no policies to campaign on. Joe Biden is going to stay in his gimp cellar until Election Day. He's not going to debate President Trump. All he's going to do is spout platitudes, read them off the teleprompter whenever they can get him coherent enough to do so. And the rest of the Democratic Party machine is going to do nothing but try and blame all of the world's current ills on Donald Trump. That's their strategy. Destroy the world and then blame Trump for it. So in the absence of having any policies to campaign on, are they going to make people's lives better? They're breaking the basic rule of politics, saying we have a better solution for the world and we're going to make the world a better place, electing us, right? That's the basics of all advertising. It's the basics of all marketing. And the Democrats have chosen an electoral strategy, the marketing and the messaging level, that is anathema to that verity. They've said, Dale Carnegie, we know how to win friends and influence people by scaring them to death. That's not going to work. So by adopting the strategy, by running Biden and Kamala Harris, they are, and I have said this before, they have already ceded the election to Donald Trump. They know they can't win the election. They've looked at their internal polling. They've looked at the primary model. They know they're not going to beat Trump. All they can do is steal the election. And this is why they're focused on irrelevancies like postal voting and mail-in ballots and the Postal Service and all of this nonsense. Because what they're trying to create enough uncertainty that they can challenge the results of individual state elections and deny the election getting certified at the national level. They are engaging in a kind of societal level extortion when they're trying to leverage their, what Michael Malice calls midwits and what Nassim Nicholas Taleb calls IYIs. They're trying to leverage the revulsion those people have of Trump to concoct a fantasy about him stealing the election. That's what their election strategy is. That's all they have, because they know that in order to steal the election, they have to be able to credibly tell people Donald Trump actually stole the election and we're going to challenge it and we're right to challenge the election. So they've begun the assault on the election at every level, all through the media, by attacking Trump on the U.S. Postal Service, for example. They've used every rhetorical trick in the book possible to distract from their real strategy, which is to delay certification of the election past the scheduled inauguration day. The goal is to lay groundwork for the doubt about the election results in battleground states. Hopefully that results will be close enough that they'll be within the margin of error for the election. For, every election in the United States has a margin for error of probably about 0.5%, even as high as 1%. But because the margin of difference is usually wider than that, it's not ever really a practical issue. I mean, there's just logistical issues in counting and collecting that many votes. Every election has some anomalies. There's corruption, sure. There's just logistical mistakes. There's just screw-ups. Everything is on the table. And what the Democrats are going to do is they're going to have an army of pollsters and poll watchers and lawyers and all the rest of it to uncover every one of these, because and what they're going to say is, well, if this is not a pristine result, then the whole election has to be thrown out, which is nonsense, because it doesn't acknowledge the very real limitations of the systems that we actually use to vote. But that's what they're going to do. And then their goal would be to challenge the electoral results in enough states to deny Trump certification of 270 electoral college votes. Because this is the key. This is what you have to understand is absolutely the key. And this is why Pelosi came out the other day and called the Republicans enemies of the state on MSNBC. She's tipping her hand that they need a discredited election in order to execute their coup. How better to do that than to paint the Republicans as the enemies of democracy? Again, feeding into this idea that Donald Trump is going to steal the election and that they're trying to block reforms of the U.S. Postal Service and they're trying to block mail-in voting and, oh my God, they want to reinstitute the poll tax and they're racist and it's all insane. It doesn't matter if they're lying. It doesn't even matter if they're trying to cheat, as it's obvious that they are. What they're trying to do is keep their Trump derangement syndrome marinated base who just wants Trump gone because they are still in the denial stage of the Kubler-Ross grief progression about the fact that their religion, the state, is failing miserably. Okay, they want those people to not get off the bandwagon. They want those people radicalized and willing to go to bat for them when they challenge the electoral zones. They need this. They need enough people. They need a group of people that they can bring out onto the streets to call into question the dictator Trump and force him to remove him from office. They've already planned a 50-day sit-in to occupy the White House, right? Starting on September 17th. This is all part of the strategy. Joaquin Flores at Strategic Culture Foundation the other day had a great article kind of going over the ins and outs of some of their strategy that they've already tipped their hand to, and I'm kind of doing the same thing here. So they need that. We're watching this same thing play out right now in Belarus, for example. Like, does anybody really believe that President Lukashenko in Belarus didn't win the election? Sure, he didn't get 80% of the vote, as the official results state, but that doesn't mean he didn't get 65% of the vote. It certainly doesn't mean that he didn't get 51% of the vote. Like, because there's not that big an organized resistance to Lukashenko in Belarus. So the idea that he's not the legitimate president of Belarus at this point is laughable. Well, the same thing's going to happen in this election with Trump, though the Democrats will probably win the popular vote because they'll ballot harvest like crazy in California and New York in order to pad those numbers. 3 million dead people will vote again, the whole 9 yards. It's easy to win an election when more than 100% of people vote in precincts all across Los Angeles. It's not hard. When 115% of registered voters vote in precincts all across Los Angeles, it's not hard to win an election. So you got to realize that so much of the upper middle class that votes Democrat in places like, my hometown of Gainesville, Florida, you have to realize that those people are never going to vote for Trump because he's vulgar and because he's rough around the edges and he doesn't respect the presidency because he tweets and all this other, whatever nonsense they come up with. What really this comes down to is that they've sold their religion to the state. Their belief system is in the state and the state's failing, and their leaders at the Democratic level, Democratic Party, are also failing. And they're in denial about this failure. And so they will hold on to it, and they will hold on to their Trump derangement syndrome long enough for the Democrats, the DNC hopes, to be able to challenge the election and keep Trump from taking office, because they don't care. They just want Trump gone, and if for nothing else than to convince themselves that they're still the goodies, that they're still on the right side of history. But your dead giveaway that we're in there to the end is that Hillary Clinton just came out and urged Biden not to concede under any circumstances if the election is close. Okay, Hillary, define close. They've already publicly game planned their strategy through the New York Times in that article from a few weeks ago. John Podesta, Hillary's former campaign manager, is playing Biden in their war game sessions, and he's making this argument. It's very clear how they're going to go about this. And the means by which they're going to go about this is not the 25th Amendment, which is the one that allows for the legislature to remove the president if he becomes incapacitated. That's basically like the FDR Amendment. In case, he dies in office or he becomes incapacitated or a vegetable or whatever, can we have a line of succession? No, this is the target here is actually the 20th Amendment. And Pelosi actually referenced it in her recent statements at MSNBC. She didn't mention the 20th Amendment directly because she's not a moron yet, even though she's clearly brain-addled. But she did reference it by calling herself second in line to the presidency, bypassing the vice president, obviously, Mike Pence. And here's what's important. And it's Section 3 of the 20th Amendment. And if you've not read the 20th Amendment recently, I'm going to read it for you. So, Section 3 reads as follows. If, at the time fixed for the beginning of the term of the president, i.e. Inauguration Day, The president-elect shall have died. The vice president-elect shall become president, period. If a president shall not have been chosen before the time fixed for the beginning of his term, or if the president-elect shall have failed to qualify, then the vice president-elect shall act as president until a president shall have qualified. Semicolon. And the Congress may by law provide for the case wherein neither a president-elect nor vice president-elect shall have qualified, declaring who shall then act as president, or in the manner in which one who is to act shall be selected, and such person shall act accordingly until a vice president or president shall have qualified. Now, what's important here is the second half of this. After that semicolon. And the Congress may by law provide for the case wherein neither a president-elect nor vice president-elect shall have qualified. This is the key. This is the path to President Pelosi. In a recent interview with MSNBC, as I just said, she described herself as second in line for the presidency. So under a 20th Amendment challenge, because, say, Michigan, Ohio, and Florida are all in courts, and they tie them up in the courts up until Inauguration Day, neither Pence nor Trump will have qualified because we elect the president and vice president together on the same ticket now. That's not the way it was originally, but it is the way that it is today. And this is the dead giveaway when she describes herself as second in line to the presidency, that they are considering the 20th Amendment option. Because at that point, all they have to do is delay certification of enough electoral college votes to prevent the president and vice president from qualifying. Right? So if Trump can only certify 265 electoral votes, it doesn't matter how many Biden hasn't certified. I mean, he could have 12 at that point. But if Trump has 269 and certified and Biden has 12 and the others are all not certified at that point, Trump's not president. Even though the possibility of that being the case is vanishingly small, that's what they'll argue. And then what happens is this. At that point, Congress convenes, because the new Congress is gavelled in before Inauguration Day. And the Congress can choose any person to be president. It doesn't have to be Pelosi. But since she's already told everybody that she's second in line for the presidency, let's not mince words here. But the truth of the matter is the Congress can get together and elect me president, or you, or Kanye, or Cory Booker, or anybody for that matter. Okay. They could select anybody to act as president until such time as the election is been certified and the president qualifies. That's the key. And so obviously they're going to choose Pelosi if Democrats retake the House, because that's what they want. Because ultimately what they care about here, and this is all of 2020 in a nutshell, they want a restoration of the globalist neoliberal order so upset when we made the mistake of electing Trump in 2016. Now, for this to work, the Democrats must also contest enough House races to prevent the Republicans from winning a majority. That way, Pelosi remains Speaker. So, by all metrics at this point, the Democrats know they're going to lose, and they're setting up a 20th Amendment challenge that's going to run from election night until Inauguration Day. Now, how do we get around that? And you get around that by Trump winning a big enough electoral college victory that it doesn't matter. That once he gets to 271, it's done. The election is over. It doesn't matter what happens to certifying the state results on a later date. Trump's got enough electoral college votes. He's the president, and there's nothing they can do about it at that point. All they can do now is try to continue to cast shade on the election itself. They'll harass Trump. They'll try and extend the lockdowns, do as much damage to the stock market and the economy as possible. They'll try and piss off as many people as possible in order to try and create chaos and blame it all on Orange Man Bad. And this is going to work for a lot of Democratic voters who simply cannot bring themselves, as I said earlier, to vote for someone like Trump, who is the epitome of everything they see themselves as not being. I spoke to one of these people over the weekend. It was very clear that under no circumstances was this woman who I was talking to, for the most part, was pretty reasonable. We had a very reasonable conversation about a lot of different topics. Now, she was a good listener, and I'm a good talker, so, salt that analysis of the conversation to taste. But, ultimately, it became very clear that there's no way she could bring herself to vote for Donald Trump because she just thinks he's beneath her, and he's beneath the office. Forget the fact that Joe Biden can't string 5 words together and make a complete sentence. That's irrelevant, but that's better than Trump. How deeply he reaches into their revulsions, how deeply he triggers their disgust circuit. Now the question is, though, those are one group of people. And the Democrats are literally banking the entire election on them. The bigger question is whether those people, these midwits, as Michael Malice calls them, are a large enough constituency to throw the election into so that it winds up within the margin of error in enough states to be able to run this entire playbook. It's a good question. And every time Antifa shows up in a blue state or battleground state suburb and starts looting and rioting, I got news for you. Those are voters that of that type that aren't coming back. I mean, yeah, they some of them may blame Trump for not invoking the Insurrection Act and bringing in federal troops to stop these kids. But at the same time, a lot of them are just going, someone going to get shot. The real fallacy here is that the Democrats are trying to paint themselves as the paragons of democracy while they subvert every aspect of democracy. The fallacy ultimately is that the Democrats, as they paint themselves with this virtuous brush, trying to claim the moral high ground that they never cheat and only the Republicans are cheating, is nonsense. We always know that both sides cheat. That's not even news. It's not news that for every Brenda Snipes down in Broward County, there's a Republican version of that in Ohio. That the Republicans don't cheat. Of course they cheat. Every election from a libertarian perspective is he who cheats best in the battleground states wins. But normally it doesn't matter who wins because they give us a false choice between Hillary Clinton and Mitt Romney, or Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush, or Barack Obama and John McCain. Each side throws up a known loser for the other side, depending on where the political winds are and how they need to shift public opinion back and forth within the very narrow paradigm of acceptable political discourse. Tom Woods calls the 3x5 index cards of acceptable political discourse. And we know all this. But this is not a normal election. And so knowing full out that they can't win with Biden, who is the only acceptable candidate by default of all the Democratic nominees to the existing DNC power structure, and to stave off the internal civil war and the internal faction of the Bernie bros and the crazy progressives, the AOC crowd, the squad, and all them. Biden was the only choice. And because Biden is just as corrupt and is just as dirty as Obama and Clinton and Pelosi and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Schumer and all the rest of them, he has to be the standard bearer. And since he's running for public office, he can't be indicted by John Durham and Bill Barr. So this election, though, comes down to it is by far the most existential threat for everyone's power base on both sides of the political aisle. This is the last gasp for the boomer cons in both parties. You got the neocons have now jumped ship officially and moved over to the neoliberals in the DNC in order to stop Trump, the populists. It's the apotheosis of the Davos crowd, 70-plus year push to perfect technocracy as embodied by the European Union and transfer power from the United States to Europe. And all of this chaos and all of this election strategy of the Democrats serves that purpose. And as far as I'm concerned, regardless of which side wins the election, the Davos crowds are going to win here because they're just going to create so much chaos. It's going to undermine the very fabric of the United States. And that's absolutely what they want as well. It's also the culmination of this century-old communist/progressive march through the institutions to destroy capitalism in the name of Marxism and disempower individuals and put them into the full service of the state, even though the state religion is failing. It's also the last opportunity for the criminals and traitors held over from the Obama administration, like Hillary, like Comey, like Obama himself, like Susan Rice and the rest of them, to avoid prosecution. Because a second-term Trump administration, free from politics, is going to go after all of these people in a way that will be biblical. We will see if Donald Trump wins outright. We will see a Lincolnian-style purge of his political opposition. If you read the history of the Civil War, you will see the real Abraham Lincoln. Tom DiLorenzo wrote a great book called The Real Lincoln on this, and dead serious when I say we will see a purge of his political rivals. And these people, unlike, in my mind, Lincoln, Trump will be completely justified in indicting them all for treason. And that's why they are so histrionic. That's why they're so desperate. And so all of their kvetching over the U.S. Postal Service is nothing more than their classic Alinsky tactic to throw shade on the election, to accuse Trump of what they are doing. Pelosi coming out and calling Republicans, quote, enemies of the state on MSNBC is the most chilling thing I've heard from a U.S. politician ever. It takes her far beyond just the typical political hack that everybody thought she was into a bloodthirsty ideologue, absolutely desperate to hold on to power, the awesome power of the speaker's gavel, as she put it. To label your political opponents this is an admission that she doesn't believe in the process of the peaceful transfer of power from one administration to the next. That time is over. And now it is just raw coup to take over the power of the White House by any means necessary. Peaceful transfer of power to these people is only acceptable when one of their club is being elected. Doesn't matter the party label. She wouldn't be doing or saying any of this. They would be running on abortion and gun control, and there wouldn't be Antifa and BLM running around the streets, burning and looting cities and suburbs if Biden was running against Jeb Bush or Mitt Romney, because they're on the team. Trump represents that which is verboten in the West. He represents the people controlling their government rather than the government controlling them. It doesn't matter that he's an imperfect standard bearer for that ideal. He's still the best we've got, and he understands this, and I still believe that he's working at his highest capacity to achieve that. Doesn't always get there, and his foreign policy is awful. But as far as trying to defend the United States, I really have a hard time arguing with the way he's comported himself as president. And for all of these reasons, while the Democrats strategize and try to figure out how they can create President Pelosi, her saying that Republicans, her political opposition, are now enemies of the state, using openly Maoist terms. For that reason and that reason alone, under any rational definition of common decency, should disqualify her from ever being president. This has been the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast for Tuesday, August 25th, 2020. It's been episode 48. I hope if you like what you heard today, give a like, subscribe. We've got Speaker, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it. You can find me. You can click the RSS feed in the show notes and do the thing. So I will be back next week with something hopefully equally as scintillating. And you guys be well. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.